Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Sophy Romvari, a filmmaker whose new short film Pumpkin Movie makes its Canadian premiere in Toronto at Hot Docs this Thursday, April 26th. It's a hybrid project, mixing documentary and dramatic elements, and in a way this is a hybrid episode slipping back and forth between Sophy's work and the film she chose. That's because Sophy picked Cameraperson, Kirsten Johnson's 2016 collage of footage shot over 25 years as a cinematographer on projects like The Oath, Darfur Now, Fahrenheit 9/11, and dozens more, interwoven with videos of her own family, offering us a sense of the life Johnson leaves behind when she goes to work. And operating from that simple principle, jumping back and forth in time, in place, Cameraperson creates a compelling, thoughtful investigation of what it means to be a filmmaker and what it costs. It's a truly remarkable accomplishment, and one that grows richer and richer with each viewing. This is Someone Else's Movie.
It was the first, quote-unquote, documentary that I'd seen in a long time that I was really moved by. I've kind of become disenfranchised with the idea of a documentary in the last few years. I think as a filmmaker, thinking about genre and what it means to have a documentary, what it means to have a fiction, especially because I'm starting to work more in a hybrid sense. Yeah. And I think that documentary is through the mainstream of, or just the average person sees documentary as real, and they think it's this is a fact-based thing, and I should believe what I'm watching. And a fiction film is the opposite, and there's basically they're two different genres. Whereas to me, a documentary is it's just as fictionalized because you still have a lens, you still have a camera and a frame, a bias. You're showing people something very specific, and it's just, I find it a little bit dishonest to call something a documentary, I think.
Okay. Well, certainly with editing, I mean, anybody who, there are a couple of films at Hot Docs this year where it's just, they're banking on people not knowing how movies are put together.
Yes, absolutely.
In order to...
it's totally relying on the ignorance of an audience, which I think is what I like so much about hybrid and films that call attention to the fact that they are films, is that it's honest, and it's yes, some of this is contrived and some of this is made up, but some of this is a real, genuine reaction, or it's coming from a more vulnerable place. And I think that's what I like so much about this film, is that it so calls attention to the fact that there is a camera and there is a person, and it's just so distinctively that. And that's what I loved about it so much, is that it really keeps you always knowing that she's showing you something, and she's showing you because she's choosing to show you.
Yeah, the why of it is so important. And I remember the first time I saw it, it was about 3 weeks before it premiered at Hot Docs, I think. And it was a link, and I was watching it late at night, and I just slowly started to realize that the assemblage was as important to the emotional heft of it as what it is you're seeing. And where pieces come in and how context is formed and all of that. And I remember just feeling so heartened because she trusted that I'd get it, because it's a huge leap to just throw things at an audience without anything other than a date and time.
Yes.
And just figure that they'll stay focused, that they won't wander off or I mean, I suppose a theatrical film is more likely to be effective because you're trapped in a space with it.
Yes.
But I've seen docs that drift away after 20 minutes. I'll finish them, but they lose their focus, and they're just not as...
Yeah, they get their point across in the first 20 minutes, and then you just feel them hammering away at the same point again and again.
Yeah, whereas in this one we're getting not just a sense of what she's done as a filmmaker, but a sense of what it's cost her and what she's missed at home, and how, people just suddenly get older, or her father deteriorates a little more, and
she does such a good job of talking about time and how you can capture time or how you can't capture time in filmmaking. And it's just fascinating the way that she the question of authorship I think is huge in this film, because she's pulling from footage that she shot for other people's films, and so it's essentially an assemblage of cutting room floor pieces, the things that didn't make it into other people's films. But is that part of their film, or is that part of her film? Is it both?
And how did she choose to, what the evaluative process is? I'm keeping this. Or the idea that she wanted to include it somehow, even though it didn't make the final cut of, someone else's production.
Yeah, or was it something that she just shot while she was on location in those places for herself, but it's still within the context of, like, the film that she was shooting?
Right.
Because she obviously made her own connections with several of the people, because she's just such an extremely empathetic and vulnerable person. Like, the amount of, like, herself that she puts into these interactions with people is just, like, heartbreaking. It's interesting that she's so sensitive and sympathetic that she's, like, crying at every turn. It's like, for a woman who's seen so much carnage and heartbreak, it seems like it never stops affecting her.
Yeah, and how do you know when you're pushing too far as a filmmaker, as a documentarian? I mean, I'm always hearing people talk about getting too close or getting too involved, but how do you not do that? Right?
Yes.
I mean, there's an honesty to this film in that she's just showing us how these bonds are formed with people that she may never see again, or who may not be alive the next time she's in this region. It's just,
absolutely,
it's an incredibly psychically exhausting job, above and beyond the potential for physical harm.
Yeah.
And somehow it all comes through. Like, you just feel it in this film in a way that I didn't necessarily feel it in the films she was shooting.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it, and that's what I was thinking about, what the difference is that a director really can make. And people, I don't think, always think about that, especially with a documentary. People are not thinking as much about the director, I think, because it's sort of like an omnipresent, like, information being funneled at you.
Yeah. Well, as you were saying, when you see a documentary, some part of your brain is saying this is real. You're seeing the facts.
Yeah, and it's so much of a documentary is just a form and a style that we've been like, brainwashed into thinking is real. Like, if it's shot on, like, a slightly lesser quality camera, and it's a little bit shaky, that's why mockumentary and all these things became a thing. But it's a mockumentary and a documentary. Like, how do you draw that line? The difference between them is just they're so similar. Obviously there's scripted, but then there's a lot of documentaries that also have scripted things and you're cutting things out. So I just think it's more honest when you are pointing out the fact that this is a film, and some of this may, not that a film needs to come with, like, a disclaimer of, like, some of this may or may not be real, but I think documentary oftentimes is trying it's got a bit of a trickery to it that I don't really love.
Well, there are a few films this year at Hot Docs which extensively recreate and restage, and some of them own up to it, and some of them kind of hope you won't be bothered too much. And it always creates a moment where I'm just pushed back a little bit, sort of roll back from the film and think, oh, is this necessary? And there's an Irish film called I, Dolores, which is essentially a dramatic retelling of a woman being interviewed, Dolores Price, who was an IRA operative, and it has actors playing her and her family, and there's even dialogue here and there, and what it does up front is simply say, this is entirely based on her version of events. Yes. So at least it's admitting that it's subjective.
Yeah.
And then there's another one where people, the filmmakers who've been performing for the camera for the entire film, also bring in this giant, ridiculous prop telescope and use it to look into the past of this space that they're investigating. And I just, it's so, cringe. I just wanted to set the film on fire. It's so self-consciously adorable.
Yes.
That the artifice of it, rather than, we couldn't figure out a better way to tell this story, so we went for this cutesy thing, which is probably a podcast in its heart, but is now a movie.
Yes.
And it's just, this is not, it seems to me to do a disservice to the reality.
Yeah.
That they're trying to tell someone's story, and the only way they could figure out to do it is to drench it in phoniness and artificial, and draw attention to it and say, we couldn't make it work, but look.
Yeah.
And in Cameraperson, Kirsten Johnson just doesn't pretend to anything. We're seeing as effectively raw as we can get. There's no commentary, there's no context. We simply are dropped into these portions of her life that we must interpret and understand. And it's so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then the chronology of it makes it so complicated that it's such a different experience from anyone else's movie making.
I think so, absolutely. And I think early on there's a shot that really, really sold me was it's a wide of like a sort of an open landscape somewhere in the US of a sky, and it's thunder and lightning, and she's got her camera on a tripod, and you hear the thunder, and then she sneezes and the camera shakes, and you become so aware that there's a person behind this camera, and then she gasps when the lightning and the thunder strikes. She like is reacting to what she's shooting, and it's the perfect summation of like what the rest of the film is like, is that, you know, there's flaw behind shots and choices that she makes as a camera person, and it's like there's human interaction with she's not trying to pretend that she's like this glossy floating camera that has no person behind it. Like you can feel her presence behind everything from that point onwards. Like, you know, she's the one filming, which I think is so great. Yeah,
and again, it's something you mentioned earlier, that there's the massaging of a standard documentary where the filmmakers remove, I mean, the audio is sweetened and things are changed. I saw something a little while ago that had explosions in it, which clearly had been redubbed or just completely manufactured. The audio was not matching what a camcorder audio would have recorded.
Right, yeah.
And this is, it's as close to the truth of it.
Yeah.
Just by including her on the audio and the little things that someone else might have cut around.
Yeah.
I was supposed to interview her a couple of times. I've never managed to do it, and it's really frustrating because I'd love to know how she figured out that this was even possible.
Right. I mean, I saw her do a Q&A at Bloor Cinema, not during Hot Dogs.
When they brought it back, right? Yeah.
And I was so excited. I had seen it previously, I think, at Doxa. Maybe it was Doxa or VIF. I saw it in Vancouver. And I wanted to see it again. I saw her and she did the Q&A, and I've never seen a better Q&A. She was so great, because she would take questions and she would run down to you with the microphone to like speak to you face to face, because she wanted to have a conversation with each person that was asking a question.
Oh, wow.
Like she would like come down, get the question, then she'd go back up and kind of elaborate to everybody else like what the conversation was that they just had. Like, she's such a person, like a people person. It's like unbelievable. And she's so like ecstatic and like passionate about inspiring other people. And I asked her a question during the Q&A, which was, did you find that making this film helped you deal with some of the trauma that you have either witnessed or faced yourself? Because there's things like seeing her mother slowly deteriorate and things like that. And like, was it helpful for you as a process making this film to process the trauma? And she said absolutely, and that's why she made the film. And that each time she watches it, she gets more and more like relief and context of like what she's actually witnessed. And that's a huge part of what I'm interested in as a filmmaker, is process filmmaking and like personal filmmaking. And if it's a means of like art therapy and trauma therapy, and she completely validated that, and I think that's why I connected to the film so much.
Wow. I mean, you certainly, and I think I said that it was her father's deterioration at the beginning, and that's me, because I've been staring at tax forms for the last 4 hours and my brain is somewhere else entirely. But yeah, no, there's absolutely so much. I mean, she's manufacturing her own catharsis with her mom, because we can start to understand. This is what I was talking about earlier, the stuff the time that's missing, the things the way we see her kids just age in between cuts, and we have to deal with that, or her mother looking worse. She's clearly trying to communicate that to us in a shocking way that says that time is passing and we can't control it, which I've always assumed is how memory works, right? People always say, I turned around and I was 60 years old or something like that. And I kind of get it, but film helps us understand just simply through a jump cut so much more powerfully.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in Cameraperson, the way she moves back and forth in time is really immediate and compelling and piercing. And the whole sense of manufacturing your own catharsis and creating a way to show other people what you feel and how you feel it, not what documentary does. That's that's an art film.
I think that what's so distinctive, like what you're saying, is she's able to tell her story while also telling other people's stories, while also never exploiting anybody's stories.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that's a huge issue for me in documentaries. So much of it's like, oh, I found this like really quirky, crazy person that I want to make a film out of because it'll be an interesting story. So I'm just going to use their downtrodden life to make something interesting. Where she's found all these people who have various degrees of mishaps in their life, and she's allowing them to tell their story, and she's engaging with them in a conversation, and it never feels exploitative. Like when she's talking to the boy with the one eye, and she's literally crying, and it's just there's so much of it that you can tell that she's really feeling for the person, and she wants them to tell their story. Or this shot with my second favorite shot in the film is the girl who is, I think, about to get an abortion, and she's just shooting her hands, and she's expresses so much just through the hands, and you never have to see this woman's face, and so we're never like confronted with putting a face to this issue, but we just know it's a woman, and we know that she's nervous because of her hands, and she's just moving her hands around.
Tension through the skin here and there.
It's such an extremely provocative shot, but without ever having to show this person's face, and that's the choice, and that's the choice she made, like as the person shooting and interviewing, and she's clearly such a good interviewer as well. Yeah,
it really does sort of call into question the concept of direction in documentary too, because if she is holding the camera and doing all of this, but she is not the official director of the film, how, I assume these things are discussed in advance and no one ever puts a thing in a movie that they don't want.
Yeah.
But it is really something to see her style evolve through time as well, and the way she just holds the camera with her family when she's at home. It's not relaxed necessarily. It's very observational. It's very precise, and when she's talking to people she doesn't know that well, there's a different level of engagement. You can be professional. You can disconnect, but she doesn't. She's relating to them almost more immediately than she does to her family, because she knows her family well enough, and
that's true.
There's a relaxed mode there
for sure
in conversation. I think I'm stepping on my own point, but I think,
I know what you mean.
But you feel this conflict, right? That she is so completely open and inquisitive and there for whatever happens, that when she's with her family, where she's supposed to be a parent or a caregiver, there's a different operating principle.
Different roles, absolutely. Yeah. And there's that one family that she goes back to years later. I can't remember what location they're in, but she's clearly developed enough of a friendship and relationship with them, and they, I think she showed them some of the footage as well, which is really really great. There's so many. It feels like so many different films you're watching because it's from so many different films, but it's the way she puts it all into one. It never feels exhaustive either.
No, it's very, what is it, like 92 minutes? It's not even, right? It's really crisp. No, it's 102 minutes. I'm bad at this.
102 minutes, yeah.
But she's got a wealth of film. It's a quarter century of shooting.
I couldn't imagine the editing process.
Yeah. And I would have loved to just ask you, do you start by marking stuff at the time? Is there, I can think of favorite memories professionally, but I wasn't running around with a camera and trying to figure out what I'll be doing 10 minutes from now and all of that. It does feel like a life lived completely in the moment. And she's able to roll with anything. But there's all of this accumulated emotion that doesn't release as we're watching it. Once we start to figure out how it works, it becomes more involving. But there are so few films that that start as puzzles and turn into really profound emotional experiences where you just can't believe how much of herself is being revealed through this.
Yeah, and that's what I absolutely connect to, is their vulnerability, and I think that's the most relatable thing in a film, is if someone can be actually fully vulnerable as a filmmaker or as a subject, and you can feel it when it's real, and you can't fake it.
Yeah.
You can't fake it at all. And like documentary, I think gets to that sometimes when it has a subject that's willing to open up in that way. But then it's a question of, where's the authorship coming from? Are they being exploited to feel vulnerable? Are they being recorded and then they're being manipulated into feeling vulnerable? But I don't feel that way with her at all, but I think that's what I aim to do in my films is just capture a sense of vulnerability, and that's why I'm so far mostly putting myself in my films, because I'm not ready to put anyone else in that position.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that there's a straight line to my mind to Pumpkin Movie, in that it is about people admitting things, confessing things, and even though there's a quasi dramatic context in that you're telling other people's stories in some cases, it's about being honest to the camera in a way that a documentary subject is expected to be, but when you are the filmmaker turning it on yourself, there's a different calculus.
Yeah, I think part of that comes from like a practical, logical place where I am not a professional actor. I don't want to work with a script that I have to memorize, because I don't believe I could deliver a script in the way that a professional actor could. So I try to create, rather than writing a script for the last like 3 or 4 films, I've sort of created scenarios for myself and other non-actors to react within, instead of having a script that is like multiple takes and trying to have a finite performance. And I think it helps me if I'm going to be in a film to not have to get something very specific across, like a tone. I set to set like a scenario and then see what kind of reactions come from it. So for Pumpkin Movie, I collected, I think, what was it, like 50 stories from different women, and it was a really surprising in how much it affected me, painful process, because a lot of the stories were a lot more extreme than I was wanting to use. The point of this film was more of a catharsis of like the everyday reactions and interactions you have with men. Yeah. And a lot of the stories were not going to fit within the context of this, because I wanted to keep it lighter, just to get across this like cathartic telling of stories. But I had to sift through a lot of stories that were just like really just heartbreaking. And so I asked on Twitter, and I asked just a lot of my friends, but I asked a lot of women who I didn't even know on Twitter. I just did an open call, so I just got messages and messages. So the script was essentially just like Twitter DMs that I had written down into a notebook. And then I asked my friend Leah, who plays the other part, to do the same. So she collected stories as well. And then we sat down. I came up with this idea like 3 days before we shot the film. And I was watching another film, and I was like, it just kind of whirled into my head like very quickly. And then I was like, I told my DP, I was like, can we shoot this film? Do you have time? Because I was actually back for VIFF with another film, and he lives in Vancouver, my DP. So we just like got together very quickly. I bought 2 pumpkins, and then we sat down, and the way we shot it was I was on camera, but she was actually in Halifax.
On Skype.
Yeah. And she barely knew what I was trying to do. I just called her. I was like, can you have a Skype conversation with me and find these stories? And that's essentially as much as I told her. Like, she understands sort of the way I work. And then so I had my stories, she had her stories, but we had not swapped stories before shooting. Okay. And so I set up, on my end, a wide camera and a closer camera of myself, and screen recorded my side, and she screen recorded her side. So there was essentially 4 angles being shot simultaneously, like television. Right. And we shot for 1 hour of a conversation, and we just let it flow naturally. I knew I wanted like a beginning and an end, so I entered the frame and I exited the frame, but that was it in terms of like a framing device. And
the pumpkin carving.
The pumpkin carving
you end
was
with a pumpkin.
Yeah, and we wanted to carve the pumpkins real time, so she carved hers and I carved mine. But the way that the vulnerability comes across and the realistic nature of it is that we're just actually having the conversation. And like, I don't know what stories she's going to tell me. She doesn't know what stories I'm going to tell her. I genuinely find her a very funny person, so anytime there's laughter, it's all just genuine. Nice. But it's also in some ways scripted, because I'm pulling these stories that are not my stories, and I'm telling them as though they are my stories. Mm-hmm. So that's where the line between documentary and fiction, I couldn't tell you. Like, the fact that it's playing at hot dogs is interesting to me. Yeah. I'm like, oh, sure, documentary. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, True False makes more sense just in the name, right?
Exactly. True False was the perfect premiere for it. That was such an amazing experience.
Yeah. But with hot dogs, too, it's the thing that, I mean, I know your work, so I guess I was expecting a level of artifice or stylistic detachment. But watching it, it was just amazing how quickly I fell into it. and it's only 10 minutes long, but its escalations are so simple and so direct that it starts off with sort of a simpler story, and then things grow more complex. And it plays with the audience expectation of, I guess, as you said before we started rolling, it's essentially a horror film that someone could smash the door down at any moment, and the framing is such that there's enough space that I was trying to figure out if you were going to go all the way for that. But then just to have unresolved tension, it's actually more disturbing.
Right.
To have nothing come of it.
Yeah.
That's obviously conveys the sense of mind, the state of mind that people live in when they feel that they're under constant, I don't want to overstep, but there's the tension of what could happen at any moment versus having to learn to live with that constant threat and tension.
Yeah,
right?
I think a lot of it was just trying to get across the point that these are normal, everyday occurrences, and that in itself is scary.
Yeah.
It's like, these are things that women are experiencing on a daily basis, and I tried to get across that I was writing them in a notebook. I'd written the stories in a notebook, but the character in the film, I wanted it to be that she'd been keeping track in a notebook,
right.
because otherwise you literally forget. And that was what part of the interesting process of collecting stories is. A lot of people were like, I don't remember when I was harassed, like what happened, because it happens so frequently, and so sometimes it's so like in passing that you don't even remember like how many times you've had a completely inappropriate interaction with someone, because you're just like, you're used to it.
Right. Which is of course why people get called out in court, because things don't line up and memories are hazy, and just it's part of that absorbed existence, or that absorbed cultural existence. I'm not even sure how to phrase it anymore. It's just part of the zeitgeist, which is awful.
Yeah, and so we tried to create this fictional tradition in which this is what we do every year.
Right. And
to get the point across that this is something that we've been doing for years and we're going to continue to do for years. And so at the end where she's like, well, maybe next year we won't have so many stories to tell. I've had a lot of people react to that line where it's just like, oh, that's such a bummer. And it's in the last shot was just the pumpkin. I think a lot of people also were resonating. Like I've had a lot of people really react to that shot, which is just finding it to be very haunting, I think, because it's this like this face, and I guess a lot of people were like talking about why pumpkins and like what that means as like a metaphor, and just like how it is in and of itself is kind of a feminist act of like carving the pumpkin.
Oh, absolutely.
And gutting it and pulling the guts out, and how I think most people would associate a jack-o'-lantern with being a man's head rather than a woman's head. I don't know why that would be, but its
would name is Jack.
Yeah, jack-o'-lantern. That's true. Yeah, and so it's subtle, but I think it's it helped with the catharsis of just like tearing into it and gutting it.
Yeah,
as we spoke.
And it's just fascinating to watch too. I mean, as a visual element, to see something potentially horrible happening off frame, that there's a knife moving around and there's things squishing about it adds to the general sense of tension in a way that I found very effective for 10 minutes in the dark.
Yeah. I think one of the best parts of showing it at True False, because that was the first time I saw it with an audience, because it was really meant to be an online film. So the fact that it's being seen by audiences now has been such a reward, is people were laughing so much. People thought it was quite funny, and I've never tried to make a comedy before. It was never really something I knew I would ever want to do, but I can see now why like people would want to. It's such a reward to have the immediate reaction of laughter. Yeah, because people are really engaging with like the uncomfortableness, but also the catharsis that I think the characters are also going through. Because what can you do? That was a big part of what I wanted to get across. Is like, you can share the stories, you can acknowledge them, and then a lot of women, you have to laugh it off, and that's all you can really do with those mundane interactions, and then try and be aware that they're happening and acknowledge them, and then just be there for each other. And that's really like the crux of a lot of like female friendships.
Yeah, I just this last year has been incredibly educational for me as a middle-aged man who is insulated from all of this, but also incredibly depressing, because not only am I just learning just how much awful shit people go through on a daily basis simply because of their gender and their existence, but I'm learning about all the people who think that it isn't such a bad thing and that women should be quiet about it, and just it's reinforcing the misery in this feedback loop that's just horrible. And you know, if there's performative allyship and all that other stuff that you get accused of when you simply say, could we not be assholes to each other? But it really does come down to something that simple. And I know I'm not going to solve it here on this podcast.
Damn.
But, right? I mean, wouldn't it be great? But it's been so crushing, I think is the word, to realize that people have internalized this level of armor and protection, and that it's been a necessity. And then to see something, to go back and look at Cameraperson, where her entire purpose is to not have armor in every situation she's in, and simply take in whatever's there. It's got to be like a physical skill, like a muscle that you can develop.
Yes,
to do that as a filmmaker.
Yeah.
Right. To allow yourself empathy in a world that is so hell bent on denying you yours.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I think
a film like this, directed by a man, would be really different.
Absolutely.
I suspect there wouldn't be as much family stuff. I think the conversations with the interview subjects would be different. The idea of perspective, and the fact that she's called it Cameraperson, is really haunting.
Yeah, I think her perspective, coming as a female director, it's hard to say what it would be like as a male director, but I just don't think that a male director would maybe think to make it.
Yeah,
is maybe the difference, like to show what it's like to be a documentary camera person, and what's the amount of emotional engagement, and maybe there wouldn't be as much emotional engagement. Like it's hard to say, but
it would be more battle footage.
Battle footage.
Like, I got through this. It's cool.
Yeah, I mean, with the documentary, it's like there's that age-old question of like, how much do you engage? How much can you help or not help? Like that, the famous shot of the baby dying with the vulture, the journalist. Do you watch? Do you help?
Right.
And she helps, and she wants to help, and she's gone back to these people, and she's developed relationships with these people, and that's what makes her as a person so special. But then her as a filmmaker, and as a camera person, so special.
And at the cost of her own relationships. And, you can feel the evaluation in the editing room somehow. Like, look at how much time you're losing when you're away for weeks or months at a time, and the changes. I just keep coming back to it because it's a motif that I found really powerful. You're seeing less, like, to see less of your mother, physically and mentally. Yeah. Every time. Yeah. What does that do to someone? How do you make it right with yourself? And the answer, obviously, is that she showed it, that she shared it.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so special about the medium of filmmaking, is that you have the ability to, like, share those experiences with people, and you're bound to find people who can relate to whatever experience it is that you're going through. I think that's what's so special about filmmaking and films for me, where I've been able to relate to them. Or, you see someone experiencing something similar, and you're like, oh, I thought no one else had ever been through that, or like, how are they dealing with it? And that's what's so evocative of films that show the vulnerability, because then you can really feel what you've been through and what they've been through, and you connect. So like when you see someone do a Q&A like that, you're like, you really feel like you know them, and you know them so well, and they don't know you, but you know them.
Right.
But that's sort of what I would like to do, and I'm trying to do with films. So far just on a short scale, but films that people can relate to in their own, like, I try to leave enough space for people to impart their own experiences, where also trying to really show a piece of myself, so that there's enough to take away, but there's not like such a closed door experience. Like, I want there to be some sort of open-endedness so that people can impart their own experiences. Like my first short film that I made outside of film school it's called 9 Behind, and it's all a phone conversation between a young girl who's essentially myself, but not played by myself, She's a phone conversation between herself and her grandmother who's in Hungary, and it's all one-sided conversation. So we just hear her talking on the phone, and she's talking to a grandmother who she doesn't know at all. She's never really met this person, and she's trying to get to know them a little bit. And the way I did it, it's sort of, you only hear her side of the story, and then I've found a lot of people watching the film, they filled in the other conversation with whatever their experience might be with their grandparent.
Right.
And trying to leave that space, but also make it, I don't want to use the word too much, like authentic, because it's coming from a real lived experience. So people are like, oh, like, how do you write your scripts? And I'm just, as part of me is like, maybe I'm either like highly uncreative and I don't want to write scripts because it's so difficult, or it's just that I want to tell stories that are so true and so based on my experience that I can't do anything else. I don't know which it is really, right. But it's like, I have a very hard time not making films since film school that are not like pretty much verbatim experiences that I've been through in a very like, I can't delineate very much. I'm like, I was wearing a red sweater, so I should probably just be wearing a red sweater.
So that's specific.
Yeah, like okay. It's like I've made a film now about a breakup, and it was just like everything was very, very specific and raw about it. Like I shot in the location of the apartment that I was in with that partner, and it was an empty apartment post breakup, and it was just, I just used the location. I just used everything about it was just literally what I was going through at the time. And people are like, oh, it feels so real. And I'm like, it kind of is. But I like to keep it like it feels like a fiction film, but it feels so real is what people say. So I try to find this balance between like feeling real but not trying to trick and pretend that it's just a document of my life.
Like, yeah, what would you call that? An authentic fiction? I mean,
yeah.
What is it?
I don't know. Apparently a documentary. I don't know, because it's like, if people want to program it as a documentary, or people want to program it, True False is sort of this hybrid thing, and then it's playing at Maryland Film Festival right after Hot Docs, okay. Which I think they are just, do they have a genre that they identify with?
Not off the top of my head, no, I don't know.
I think they're kind of more open, I guess just more open.
Yeah, and a shorts program is more likely to mix and match anyway.
Yeah,
you don't have to declare yourself.
That's true, yeah. But yeah, I don't know that I could specify what the genre is that I'm trying. I keep saying hybrid fiction, but like maybe some people think of that differently. Like how would you define a hybrid fiction film?
I think, a hybrid to me is a film that is working with facts but acknowledges in some way the liberties that it's taking, mm-hmm. or the way that the only way to tell the story is to create a fiction around it, or find a way to. It's what Ida Loris does. It's openly acknowledging that you're seeing recreations, mm-hmm. but they are intensely cinematic, and it's in widescreen, and it does everything it can to tell you it's a movie. Mm-hmm. It's polished and glossy and almost beautiful.
Interesting.
And that works because of how artificial it is. There's no attempt to pretend that you're seeing a flashback or a memory.
Yeah, I need to see that.
Yeah, it's really something.
Yeah.
And with the question of hybrid, I mean, Cameraperson is absolutely found footage, mm-hmm. right? I mean, it is a documentary. It's real footage, and I felt like it was as authentic as it gets.
Yeah.
But the structure of it is manipulative. I mean, it's creating a mood.
Yeah, it's a form. She has a form.
Yeah.
She's not just slapping together like the way that we know like a Netflix documentary to be.
Right. The archival footage, talking head, recreation, talking head, voiceover. Yeah, exactly. It's all just, oh, he was crazy, all right, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
You can make those in your sleep now.
Name popping up in the corner.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. After the first sentence
is
spoken, but you gotta wait and then pop the name.
And then obviously the music is very manipulative as well. The way that
so many of these.
Yeah, and it's the same way, and it's just, it's so funny to me that people can't see the difference. And I don't want to sound like pretentious about it, but it seems that people are so willing to believe what a documentary is telling them.
Yeah, and if you see enough of them, you can see the strings being pulled. You can tell, which is why Cameraperson is so daring in that it really is just sort of unadulterated footage that is organized in a way that makes you understand and reach the catharsis that she wants you to reach. Mm-hmm. But that individually, I mean, I would watch these on YouTube for days if they were available. There's just every one of them is fascinating behind-the-scenes material or an interesting portrait of her home life. And it's someone whose work I'm already interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the purest form of documentary, if I had to put it simply. Like if documentary, it's like someone went back to the beginning and they were like, this is what documentary is and should be. Yeah. What she's done, I think. Which I don't really have much of an interest in making a straight documentary, which is what's interesting about now having this film be defined as a documentary in some ways. Is I never intended to make a documentary or have it called a documentary, but I think it's happening all over, that people are mixing genres. And like for me, one of the first like more mainstream hybrid fiction films I saw was Kate Plays Christine.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Robert
Greene's film,
yeah. And just at the time I was just like, oh, interesting. And just like films like that where you're like, oh, that's also a film, and that's also a film, and just different things that you see that you're like, it doesn't have to be a certain way, and you can make it however you want. And for me, it's honestly like the best way as a low, no budget filmmaker to make films is hybrid, because you're able to use what you have very little, and then you're able to just make that work because you're not trying to create any sort of like extensive production value. Like right. I literally spent $30 on Pumpkin Movie. I bought 2 pumpkins, and that was the budget.
Okay.
For the film. And I think you can't really do that if you're making a fiction film where you're having to recreate everything.
Oh, sure. It's no, I mean, just the lighting package alone, right? To make it look period or cinematic or whatever it is you're doing, plus wardrobe, plus everything else. I mean, Dolores must have cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. It's that kind of thing where people are driving picture cars.
Right, exactly.
For some scenes.
I will say a huge part of it, though, is my DP, Devin Scott, who I've made 3 of my 4 short films with in Vancouver, is one, always ready to make a film with me with like basically zero context. I'm just like, can you grab your camera and come? Right. And he always says yes. And then 2, he's just incredibly talented, and he's able to, like that wide frame for Pumpkin Movie, he had nothing to work with and he still made it look extremely cinematic, and
it looks great.
He's able to just like pull it off. So a huge part of the low budget, no budget is having very talented friends.
Sure.
And
that's how you build a creative team, right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's how it works.
It's a huge part of it. And the other thing is having, I work with like four person crew. I would say is like one person doing sound, one person like a DP, usually Devin, and maybe an extra person helping with camera, and that's like the entire crew. And then most of my films, if not all of them, have been edited by the same person, also from Vancouver, Will Ross, and he edited this film as well, which I couldn't have fathomed editing myself. I think, like being in the film,
right,
and trying to like pick moments. And I told him, I'm like, I want to include this story, I want to include this story, and then he found a way to cut it together that really, I don't know that I would have come to on my own. Yeah,
that feels pretty seamless. I mean,
yeah,
it's invisibly edited almost. You just cut from conversation to conversation, from story to story. Yeah,
and I think it was a choice that we came to together to only use her Skype and not my Skype, because we recorded my Skype screen as well.
Oh yeah.
Just to keep the separation between the 2 perspectives. I think it helped my friend Leah, who's on the other side, with her performance, that she didn't feel like she had all these cameras on her. She just felt like she was Skyping me.
Right.
Because there was no way for her to even see that there was like a crew or anything behind her. Right. So she was able to just react naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then in terms of hybrid filmmaking, what you're getting is, I mean, technically her Skype window is documentary, right? Like, except that she's telling stories that aren't necessarily hers personally.
Yes, exactly.
But you get the sense that these stories are being structured towards a larger truth, which is what Cameraperson does. Both with Johnson's stories and others that she filmed herself. So I think we kind of already answered the question, but what, if anything, this is how the podcast always ends, what, if anything, of Cameraperson have you borrowed or stolen or incorporated into your own creative DNA?
Interesting. I think a lot of it is, as we've talked about, is just willingness to be vulnerable and to put yourself in your films. And I always try to, I think it's like a Bresson quote where he says, only make something that only you could bring into the world. Like I'm slashing that quote, but it's well,
it was French originally, so
it just, the idea that like to make a film that only could come from your experience. I'm not right now interested in making films that are, a script that someone else written and just I'm directing. I think it's important for me to make a film that is purely something that only I could bring into the world. And I think that for her, that was very specific to that film, and that no one else could have made that film.
Oh, yeah.
Even though the footage exists, I don't think another editor or another person, like, it is clearly her film, and the authorship is completely up to her. And I think that I find that very inspiring, and I find her incredibly inspiring as a person, the way she goes about the world, but as a filmmaker as well. And I'd like to see where she goes. If she's, like, it's hard to imagine her. This seems just like the magnum opus. Like, how can you go from here?
Yeah. You would need another 25 years of footage, and maybe they become her version of the Before trilogy, where we just check in on her life every now and then. But I don't know that you could do this again. I don't know that she would want to. I think a huge thing for me about it was that she clearly needed to make this film, and I feel that for me, if I've gone through something and I need to make a film about it, it is a catharsis. And for her, like, this clearly was just, it came out of her. Like, it was like, she couldn't, I think she spoke about it in the Q&A, that she couldn't continue on without making it. She needed to make it, get it out of her system. And I think that in relation to, like, processing trauma, that's how I find it for myself too, is like, if something's happened to me, the best way for me to process it is to get behind a camera and look at it from that perspective, and to get some distance from it, to get some perspective from it, and then also have people be able to engage with the story and maybe relate to the story. And then it's also nice to have that memory capsule, like, even just looking back at, like, the film about my breakup, which is Let Your Heart Be Light. That's the one that Dara and I co-directed. Yeah. Just looking back at that, I'm like, it's so nice that I have this, like, time capsule of this, like, really dramatic time in my life. It's now in this nice little neat little package, right? And filtered through your own particular vision, and it's what is it? There's a line from, I'll never remember it. There's a line from a movie about someone who refuses to watch things on videotapes. He just likes to remember things how he remembers them. I think Bill Pullman says it. It's probably a Denver's film, but no, it's Lost Highway. It is Lost Highway. Pullman and Lost Highway. And that's always struck me as so arrogant, but also vulnerable, because we all remember things differently. Memory is subjective, period, full stop. But the idea that you wouldn't want your memory challenged is somehow just an incredibly limiting thing to say, but also really easily understood. I get that. I don't agree with it. I need evidence from time to time just to remember what I said about something or how I feel about something now. It's not how I felt about it then. But yeah, you're creating, by making movies about things that have come out of your own life, you are owning them in a way that it's an inarguable version now, because you've created this version of it. And you can just point to it and say, just like with Cameraperson, 25 years of Kirsten Johnson's life are in this little DVD right here.
Yeah, exactly.
And does it help? Does it ultimately help to lock it down that way and have a definitive version, even if it is a definitive construction?
Yeah, I think it helps in different ways. Like, it helps, the process of making it is very helpful in one way, and then the process of reflecting back on it immediately after you've made it, and then going back and looking at it later. There's many different layers of effect that you can have from making a film, I find. And I think that in terms of, like, what I would like to do eventually is to teach filmmaking as art therapy, as trauma therapy. And so to have people be able to find that within themselves, to be vulnerable, and to make a film that can help them process an experience that they've had. And I feel like that is the power of these kinds of films, is being able to open up that part of yourself, and then you can reflect on it, and then you can reflect on it immediately, and you reflect on it from years later, and it's such a unique perspective that you can't really have just by, like, writing in a journal or painting a picture. It's such a specific to film, I think.
Yeah.
Because you can't share it with people, and as a visual medium, you can't share it with people in the same, you can't share other art forms in the same way, because it's such a varying perspective that you have from those other art forms.
Sure, yeah. So much of it leaves it up to the audience to create the image.
Yeah.
Whereas literally with film, you're showing them.
Yeah, film is a very, like, it can be as much of a literal interpretation of your experience as possible, I think.
Mm-hmm. Even when you're creating it entirely out of
which goes back to the
artificing.
question of how much of it's real and how much of it's fake. But that's part of what I'm trying to do with my thesis. Is I've basically asked the question: is it possible to heal from trauma through the process of making a film? And I'm making a very, like, my most personal film in my MFA right now, very much related to, like, my own family and experiences, and I'm putting myself in that question, and similar to how she's put herself in her film and her family and her experiences, and just how can you allow yourself to process these things, and the same way you do with a therapist and talking about it, this is just another way to acknowledge. I think it's about acknowledgement, like acknowledging experiences. And if you put it in a film, it's like it happened. It's real. It happened, and I need to acknowledge that it happened. And then that way you can move past it. And
is that what you find for your own stuff? Are you moving past it? Is it helping?
I think absolutely, yeah. And I think moving past it, but also being able to acknowledge something is an experience that you have gone through is a huge part of trauma, because so much of trauma is, like, suppressed, right? And
sure.
In this way, you're able to acknowledge it's happening, and then have people acknowledge that you've experienced it as well. I think it's a huge part for me, is, like, wanting people to know, and then wanting people to know that other people have been through trauma, and just having other people know that you need to be tender and kind with people because they've been through things. And it's just like, if you can relate to an experience, then that makes someone feel a little bit better. And I find for sure when I watch a film where I see someone going through something that makes me feel better, like, in a different way than if you just have a conversation with someone. Yeah. Like, have you seen the film Manic that came out?
Oh, last year, yeah.
Last year, which I have become now good friends with Kalina, the director, because we sat down and we just both talked about our experiences, and I found her film. I could do another podcast on her film. I just found it to be extremely relatable and compelling and vulnerable, so vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just almost shocking to watch someone interrogate not only her father but herself and her family's life, and it's I guess Sarah Polly's Stories We Tell sort of does the same thing. In telling the story of your family, you cannot help but tell the story of who you are.
Yes.
Because
you can't disconnect it.
Exactly, and these things shaped you, and so you're confronting. In Manic, it's remarkable. We're watching basically a story of a cult leader who never really got to have a cult.
Yes.
And instead brought that to his family.
Yeah.
And left them with the legacy of mental illness and conditioning and sociological tics that maybe wouldn't have existed otherwise. But it was really fascinating. It must be out there somewhere. I'm sure people can find it.
Yes, I think...
probably on iTunes.
I think it's working towards getting some distribution for sure. It's done quite well. It was her first film as well. And for her, it was just a film, again, that she needed to make. Like, wow. She had not made anything previous to that. That was her first film. Yeah.
I wonder what does she do next? I mean,
she's coming to Hot Docs, actually. She's coming to do the Doc Acceleration Lab.
Oh, great.
So she'll be here, because it premiered, I believe, at Hot Docs as well, so they're having her back. And we're similar ages. We have so many similarities. It was really great to meet her. And she's going to be, I think, coming to Pumpkin Movie.
Oh, fantastic.
As well.
All right,
yeah.
Well, I'll have to grab her for the podcast.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. And it's just, it really is incredible that the documentary is still capable of surprising us, I think, and that delivering I think maybe that's it, that the personal docs are becoming more popular now simply because the means to make them, as you say, you can do it for almost nothing. If you have a story worth telling and you have some skill at telling it, it's possible to still make something that is not just engrossing and interesting, but immediate and powerful and relevant, and I don't know, I've seen so many weak ones lately that try to compensate for the lack of a vision with colors and music and other things. That this is what I'm thinking about Cameraperson. If you strip it down to these are things that I saw and here's the way that I'm showing them to you, that's all you need, and it is incredibly powerful. Manic does the same thing. And
that's always going to be relatable and and very strong. Like it's because it's so raw. And I think people, maybe, yeah, you're right that there's more of a emphasis on personal storytelling right now, and I wonder why that would be. I wonder...
Well, the new generation thinks they've discovered it. I think is what it comes down to.
I wonder if, I think it's also like social media is so much about that right now with like Instagram story. Like everyone's constantly telling stories, their own stories, and people are more interested in documenting more than ever.
Mm-hmm. Well,
everything.
There's more footage. Isn't that the latest bit of wisdom, that there's more footage being shot every day than there ever has been? Because with every new camera, with every new phone, there's just more.
Oh, I believe it.
This ever-expanding sea of information.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's even, like, Snapchat and Instagram, like, film festivals and this kind of stuff now. I know, it's pretty cringy, but it's true. And, like, everyone's wants to have a camera in their hand and has maybe a better understanding of, like, why we document things and why we want to document things, and I don't know. It's not the worst way for the world to go, I guess, to be interested in hearing stories and engaging with personal stories.
Yeah, and it's inevitably going to illuminate more than it hides, which, somebody said that it wasn't until cell phones that aliens stopped visiting Earth and police started shooting black people, that it wasn't until documentation that you could prove these things. And the idea that you can deny institutional racism becomes harder every day because there's just more proof of it, and sexism and everything else. I think
consequence, as we were talking about before, like we're in the age of consequence.
Yeah, here's hoping.
Yeah.
My thanks to Sophy Romvari, whose short film Pumpkin Movie is screening in the Silence Breakers program at Hot Docs in Toronto, showing this Thursday, April 26th at 8:45 p.m. at the Tiff Bell Lightbox, repeating Friday, April 27th at 12:45 p.m. at the Tiff Bell Lightbox, and again Saturday, May 5th at 5:45 p.m. at the Scotiabank Theatre. It's really something. Tickets are available at hotdocs.ca. Check it out if you can. You can find Sophy on Twitter at Sophy Romvari, all one word, and you can find Cameraperson on Blu-ray and DVD in the Criterion Collection. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play, and if you're in the US, it's on Filmstruck. Also, if you're interested in Kalina Burton's Manic, it just had a theatrical run in Montreal, and, as Sophy said, it's working its way towards wider distribution. Keep an eye out. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, S-E-M-Cast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you want to leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, that would be greatly appreciated. Every little bit helps, it truly does. Thanks for your support, and thanks for listening.